Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Hands-On Healthcare Machine Learning broadcast. I'm Levi Thatcher, here with Mike Massanduno.
Whoa, Levi, what are you doing here?
I'm back. It's on paternity leave. I have a new baby.
Oh, congratulations.
Thanks. Nice to be back.
Yeah, it's great to have you.
Thanks, guys. We're excited to bring Risa Myers on the show today from Houston Methodist, data scientist there, and in a new group. And so we'll be chatting with her here in just a moment.
Yeah, we've got a great show. It's really awesome that Risa could join us. Before we get started, as normal, we want to make this interactive, so feel free to engage with us in the chat. You can log into YouTube and get your name next to your comments. You can up your resolution, although we don't have any code on the screen this week, but if you need to, it's in the gear in the lower right corner. We'd love to have you join our community and participate on Slack outside of the broadcast. And this week was pretty quiet in the news. There wasn't really any news to discuss, and it was also pretty quiet in the user submitted questions. I guess we just did such a great job last week.
Answering all the questions,
yeah,
weirdly.
Nobody had any other questions, but we did kind of make we did ask users to download the latest version of the package straight from GitHub and check out the new XGBoost multi-class classification.
I'm excited for that
Functionality. So we'll have to tell Levi about it. But if you had a chance to use it, please let us know in the chat how it went, how we can improve it, and maybe I'll do that when I get some time. But with that, I think we should just kind of move into the main event here. And
yeah, we're excited to have Risa Myers join us from Houston Methodist. Thank you so much for joining us, Risa. Thrilled to have you on.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
Super exciting stuff you guys are working on down there. And just to start with the broad level here, so Houston Methodist is a health system based in Houston, kind of scattered throughout the part of Texas there.
Yes, we have 8 hospitals throughout the greater metro area here. The last one is opening up this summer in the Woodlands.
Beautiful. And Houston Methodist Hospital, which is in Houston, been ranked #1 hospital in America by U.S. News and World Report. I'm not sure if that was last year.
We're on that top list. We're number 1 in Texas. I think we're number 19 by U.S. News. Yeah, number 1 in Texas, number 1 in Houston, and I think it's number 19 in the U.S.
Super impressive.
On that list.
wow,
Yeah.
That is impressive.
Thank you.
That is amazing.
Houston is a real hotspot for medicine.
It is.
It is. We actually have the largest medical center in the world here.
Oh,
There
wow.
are, I don't know how many institutions offhand, but as I was saying earlier, looking out the window, I can count Baylor College of Medicine, Texas Children's, MD Anderson, St. Luke's. They're all right here in one place.
A hotbed for healthcare.
Yeah, that's super
It is.
exciting.
That is exciting. So yeah, thrilled that you could join us. We'd love to just hear a little bit about your background, Risa. So in general, how did you get to where you are? Tell us a little bit about your path.
Okay, sure, thanks. So I'm a computer scientist, pretty hardcore. I actually have 4 degrees in computer science, which I'll tell you is probably one too many. I got involved in healthcare. Really, my first job out of my undergraduate degree was I went to work for Hewlett Packard back when they had a medical products group. We were building cardiac ultrasound imaging systems, and that just really got me engaged in a field that helps people out. It was non-invasive, which was great, so there was no blood, but I just felt like I was building something that made a difference. From there, I actually started working on a master's in computer science part-time and remote. This is back in the dark ages. They actually videotape classes and take them across the country, a week delayed. And part of that deal was I actually went out to California to Stanford to finish my master's degree. So I did that, and then life circumstances brought me to Houston. When I first moved here, I went to work for a research group at Baylor College of Medicine. We were doing some very early EHR work. We ran out of funding, which often happens in research groups, so I went and did something completely different for a while, and really hit a point in my life where I realized I wanted to come back to healthcare. It's just a field I feel very passionate about. I like the fact that it can help people. You understand disease better, you understand what's going on better, and you make a difference in the world and in people's lives. So I took a number of steps to make that happen. A few years ago, probably about 8 or 9 at this point, I joined MD Anderson Cancer Center, and I thought, this is great. I'm set. I can bike to work. It's the top cancer center in the world, or certainly the country, probably the world. And there I had a chance to work on a data warehouse. So I was part of the IT team, and we were taking the transactional-based data from the EHR and transforming it into a format where people could do longitudinal research on it. And that was great, and it was useful and neat. But what I realized was what I really wanted to do was I wanted to use the data warehouse, not build it. So in order to do that, to really sit at the table with the docs, you need a PhD. So it wound up being a good time in my life to really step out across the street. Rice University is right across the street from the Texas Medical Center. And I took some time and got a PhD in computer science with a focus on machine learning. while I did that, I had the chance to continue to collaborate both with people at MD Anderson, and then I met some other people, some faculty at Baylor College of Medicine, and I did some research with them as well. So all of my PhD work, again, was focused on predicting outcomes, my work was predicting outcomes from temporal clinical data. In particular, I tended to look at intraoperative or ICU data and predict outcomes from that. So I collaborated with MD Anderson. People there continued to work with me, and I found the new collaborators at Baylor College of Medicine as well. And now I'm at Houston Methodist and hoping to do some similar work here. I've been here just over a year now.
What a fantastic place to do your PhD. Such a hotbed of healthcare innovation. That's beautiful. And always great to see more folks from computer science coming into healthcare as well. It's nice that they have that tie-in.
Right.
So, new group there at Houston Methodist. It started up about a year ago. Do you mind just talking a little bit about the origins of the group and how you're structured within the hospital system itself?
Sure. So the group is not as new. The addition of data scientists is new. There are two of us here now. We've been here about just over a year. We're part of an IT informatics group. And the focus here, we really sit on that boundary between research and operations. It's one of the things that really appealed to me about this job is we have a chance to, so Houston Methodist it's an academic hospital, but the main priority is clinical care for the patients. So we do research, but we really are looking after our patients a little more than some other more traditional academic hospitals. And we have that balance. So we have the opportunity, so that the IT informatics group was formed, hang on, I had notes on this, I don't remember all. So originally it started from a request back in 2012 from the CEO, Dr. Boom. He asked us to put together a data warehouse. And the group kind of grew and evolved from there. So we have people on the team who do web development and app development, mobile app development. We have some database experts. We usually also always have a resident doctor or medical doctor on hand who also helps us understand the terminology better and helps us interact when we need to get some advice from the clinicals or from the clinicians or get some more information. So the team has really evolved so the way we work, we get requests from a number of different places. We'll get requests from the operational side. I'll get a VP who emails me and says, hey, can you look into what are the differences where we want to look at this particular intervention that we've done with patients? Are there patients that it helps more than others? Is there a subpopulation where it matters more? Or we'll get a doc who's really excited about predicting readmissions in a particular subset of patients. So they'll champion and come to us and say, hey, we want to build an app to predict readmissions on this patient body. And we'll spend time and work with them and figure out what's involved. Do we have the patients? Do we have the data? We have an oversight committee that meets about monthly. I think we're going to switch to bi-monthly shortly. And sometimes in the summer we don't meet as often. But on that board, we have the chief medical the chief medical officer. We have the senior VP in charge, maybe she's an executive VP. So basically the CEO of this hospital, the Houston Methodist Hospital, which is our flagship hospital and our high acuity hospital here in the medical center. The CIO sits on that board. The CFO, so the chief financial officer as well. We have the emeritus director of the Research Institute there. The chair of the surgery department just recently started attending. We have a new center for outcomes research, and that chair has started attending the group. So we have really the right people in the room. We have someone in charge of the physicians organization and quality. We have all the people in the room who are able to balance the hospital's interests overall. So the projects will either come from them or from other executives or from clinicians, and we basically have a roundtable and we say, okay, here's what somebody wants to do. There's a form they fill out that says, here's what's novel and here's what's different and here's what the patient cohort looks like and what we think we might be able to answer, both in terms of operations and in terms of research questions. And then we talk about it. Does it make sense to do it? Does it not? We have limited resources. Do we want to go in this direction or not?
Wow, that's fantastic. So I think this is kind of common with data science groups in general and specifically in healthcare, that you have sort of these grassroots efforts of, okay, well, let's figure out who's working on what and who's interested in machine learning and doing these sorts of things and get a project going with them. But then also you have an executive committee, and are they specifically for data science type prioritization? Is that why they meet?
For this team, that team meets mainly to prioritize what this team works on. So the team focuses on the corporate data warehouse, any mobile apps that we do that are tied to research, and the data science initiatives.
That's fantastic. One thing we've noticed a lot is it's good to make sure that you're solving the question that's most important for the hospital.
Right.
A lot of times with machine learning, it's so cool that you just want to go make predictions for everything, but obviously if they're not helpful, then you're not really accomplishing much.
Yeah, I got to say, it felt like a failure when we decided that machine learning wasn't appropriate for a specific product. It was like, but we need them in all of the products.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, no,
you have to be practical about it.
We don't need it in that one.
Exactly.
Well, I think another thing I've found in my time here is we also need to do some foundational work. One of the groups I'm working with is focused on population health, and I'm helping them build a database and work with a vendor right now. And they just needed some help understanding their data better and processing it and doing a sanity check on it. And so it's not really data science per se, it's maybe more data engineering and more database design, but it's fulfilling a need, and it's getting to know their domain, and it's getting to know the people. And that's a lot of what I think I've spent this first year doing, is getting to know people and getting to know the data. Houston Methodist changed EHRs 2 weeks before I joined. So, okay, the data warehouse was built on the old data, and now we've got the new system coming in, and trying to figure out, my PhD work and my background has been mainly in surgery and anesthesia. So now I've got a broader set of data that I'm dealing with, and I've got to learn what does that mean and how does that work and how do I understand that data, interpret it, and really start building these friendships and collaborations and understanding where are we going, what's important to the organization.
That's fantastic. A lot of common themes I think we'll hear throughout healthcare is, okay, well, how do we prioritize and how do we find folks to work with? So with this population health initiative that you mentioned, like with Mike and I, like working with Health Catalyst folks, you're not always helping with data science or machine learning related matters. Sometimes it's like, hey, how can I get p-values out of this? Or how can I run some t-test? So with the population initiative that you mentioned, how did that collaboration happen? Like, are you kind of just striking up conversations in seminars, or
so I'm going to talk a little about this one, and I'm going to tell about another project that I'm really excited about. So this one, I actually interviewed, as part of my interview process for the job, was I interviewed with the physician in charge of that operation. So she was someone that I just felt like, we kind of clicked and we had that dynamic. So when I came on board, I made an effort to get to talk to her and say, hey, can we get involved in this? It turns out at one of these oversight meetings, the chief medical officer said, you guys should get involved in population health. And that also triggered okay, now we've kind of got that executive direction to go get involved. And sometimes you go and you say, okay, how can I help? How can I, what can I do? And it's not always the glamorous, okay, I'm going to build this fancy model. Sometimes it's, okay, let me combine your data for you so we can get the answers we need to figure out, is the program working? And these are just simple metrics, how many patients started, how many patients finished. But again, it's the groundwork you need to get going. Another example that I want to give is, so I've got a lab coat on, right? I'm a scientist, I get to wear a lab coat, thank you. It's back to that, if you want to sit at the table with the MDs, how do you get them to pay attention to you? How do you get them to notice you and not just, you're just another administrator or support person in the hospital? So I go to grand rounds. We are an academic institution, and there are a number of groups that have grand rounds, which for those of you not familiar with it, are basically teaching opportunities. They can be someone within the hospital giving a talk, or a lot of times they bring in outside speakers. And it's great to go to these, one, because you learn something, and two, you learn who's there and who are the important people and what are the topics that are being discussed, because these are also probably important to the organization. So I'm terrible at raising my hand at the end of a lecture and asking a question. My mind goes blank. But what I am good at is going up to the speaker afterwards and saying, hey, you're doing X, I'm doing Y, can we talk about, and I did exactly that in one case. There was a physician who had given a talk, and she had big bold red letters on one of her slides, we don't know how to predict intracranial response in these patients. And I wanted to jump up and down because that was part of my thesis. So I went up to her afterwards, I said, okay, I know how to do this. And she was a really busy woman, and she said, oh yeah, we'll talk. And I think the next 2 months, every time I saw her in the hallway, hey, can we talk? And I had friends put in a word for me, and we finally sat down. And what you find then is it turns out there were only 3 patients they could have looked at, so we didn't go there, but you have this negotiation of, what questions do you have? What skills do I have? What data do we have? How do we find the right sweet spot where we can start doing something that matters? And this is a fantastic project that I'm very excited to be working on. So in this case, we're looking at liver transplant patients. And there's a metric that the national organization uses to evaluate centers. And we feel that there's a measure in that evaluation process that we think is very subjective. So we want to replace it with a more objective measure. So here's a chance where we're going to say, okay, we don't have all the national data, but we have our data. So let's look at our data with the current score. Let's take out that objective measure, see how it does as a baseline, and let's put in something else that we think, take out the subjective measure and put in our objective measure, and look at those different models and see if one of them can more accurately predict what's going on.
That's a fantastic point.
That's
So
really cool.
a lot of what data scientists do is not just straight up machine learning. We play that up a lot in the broadcast because we're excited about it and getting into it more and more, and that's what our packages do.
It's titled the
It's titled that. We
we
got
got
to play up our title. But really, a lot of the work of the data scientist is, okay, how do we gather this data appropriately? Are we measuring the right things?
Right.
Are we using t-tests appropriately? It's basic statistics a lot of the time.
Right.
And it's fantastic that you brought up the social aspect of it. I feel like I think we're all pretty nerdy, but there is, I think, a social component of the data scientist role that's maybe not there in the software engineer's role or the statistician's role. Has that been, I guess, pretty integral to your work then, being willing
So
to
I think it's
step
about
out of your comfort zone?
communications. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's standing in the elevator with a bunch of docs after grand rounds thinking, I got to introduce myself. Oh, okay, hi, I'm Risa. And just working with it, because I think maybe some of the docs have the same problem we do, that we're a little introverted and antisocial, but you have to be willing to communicate. Why am I talking to you guys, right? My advisor drilled into me, any chance you have to talk about your work, take it. Get a chance, meet people, have random conversations. Somebody approached me on LinkedIn and said, hey, I'm working with one of the docs there. Do you want to? Okay, so now we've got another potential project that we're working on. Be willing to talk to people. Not everything is going to turn into a great research project, but you don't know where it's going to go. And in the meantime, you're going to learn what else is going on at your institution or what else is going on in the field. And that's been really valuable to me.
That's fantastic advice. Kind of the always say yes mentality of, sure, I'll help you out for 20 minutes. Like, let's see where it goes.
Yeah,
Why not?
right. That's exactly right.
And I feel like across machine learning and data science in general, data scientist roles a lot of times are there to help the company learn more about data science in general. So like at Health Catalyst, we're helping others become more familiar with R and Python and machine learning. So how has that played into your role specifically? So the education component, is that not...
That's a great question.
It's not really a mandate, but is that part of what you guys are supposed to be doing?
Great question. So that's not something we're doing a lot of today outside of our group. Within our group, we have a monthly journal club where everybody takes a new technology or a new topic, and once a month we'll present about NoSQL databases or TensorFlow.
That's a great idea.
And so that helps the whole group stay up to speed at least a little bit on some of that, and we try and spend some time playing with those tools as well. We haven't done anything here, but I'll tell you, I've given a grand rounds talk at MD Anderson in anesthesia about my work. So there are the opportunities to say, hey, here's what we are doing, and here's what is going on in this field. Here's the domain, but here's the machine learning part to it. So there's certainly the opportunity of doing that here as well. And some of it really is, hey, here's who I am, and here's what I'm doing, and here's the kind of things I do. And I tend to do that more on a one-on-one basis. Go up to talk to somebody, hey, I'm doing X, Y, Z. Can I help? Can we talk? So nothing formal in terms of learning to the hospital yet, but I think that might come down the road.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of informal opportunities with all the research going on. There has to be a lot of folks that are interested in machine learning and stats in general, and of course data.
Right.
So it's a fantastic opportunity.
So on that note, Risa, we had a couple questions from the chat. People are interested in kind of what your day-to-day tool set, your data set, what that kind of stuff looks like. I think you mentioned you're using R for a lot of your analysis. Do you have like a sandbox of test data you can use, or can you talk about that a little bit?
Okay, sure. So what do I want to say? Most of my time I spend writing SQL code. Okay. Honestly, I'm pulling a lot of data we have a data warehouse, so I pull a lot of data from the EHR, from the data warehouse, and then I'm starting to pull data from the new EHR, and we're trying to integrate that as well. I do that. I do a lot of the statistical analysis I'll do in R. Because I'm a computer scientist, I like to program. I haven't had the right opportunity to do that here. So one of the challenges I have is my PhD work was on predicting outcomes from real-time data. So I have this really cool model that I want to use, but we don't have the data yet. We actually don't have the infrastructure. Like a lot of hospitals, real-time data takes up a lot of volume, and they don't preserve it unless there's a reason to, or they preserve only some subsets of it. So back to that groundwork, I'm working with the medical device integration team to start thinking about how do we start saving that data, and what do we save, and how do we save it, and how do we access it later. So then hopefully I can go back to either my C++ code or R or something else to start analyzing some more of that data. But I would say mainly here we use R and a lot of database programming. Some people use Stata here as well. Mm-hmm. I've used that a little bit for some of the analysis.
That's really interesting to hear. I guess no matter how much you want, even with 4 computer science degrees, you can't get away from SQL, right?
No. It's the common currency
it's
in
a necessary thing in data.
Yeah, great advice from you folks out there. You want to get in the business, learn SQL.
Learn SQL. Oh, and not just for manipulating data, but it's when you get a new data set, how do you store it? One of the things I think is so important is make sure whatever you do is repeatable. I'll get a project from one of the VPs and I'll do it and I'll think, oh, it's done. It's not done. That was just phase 1. Somebody asks you where you came up with a number, make sure you can always defend where did that number come from. I literally keep a text file. Okay, here's the query I ran. Here's the file it went into, because you always end up going back to that information and doing the next level. And you've got to, even though you think at the time when you're in the middle of it, it makes sense. Oh, I'll never forget this. You forget it. So I really try and document, what did I do? How did I generate this graph? Where did this data come from? so that later on, sometimes, right, sometimes you find a mistake. You misunderstood something, you left a condition out, or, oh, they want to do this with a different subset of the population. It's much easier when you have that query available to go back, pull the data a little differently, manipulate it a little differently, but you know exactly what you did.
Yeah, maybe 4 months down the road, the executive slightly changes their question, or some
Right.
other executive wants it for a different division. That's fantastic
Exactly.
advice. So in terms of the prioritization process, you mentioned it's kind of grassroots and you have this committee as well. So have executives been excited about clinical decision support using data science and machine learning? Or what are the kind of the flavors of
Very much
projects
so.
that are getting prioritized?
So I think it's the same thing that you see across the country right now. Everyone is looking at readmissions, probably more than anything else. They know the changes are coming in the policies, and how do we start looking at those numbers and doing the right things for our patients? Methodist has started a continued care organization with CMS. So again, they're looking at how do we care for these patients best? How do we reduce our costs? How do we care for everyone? Reduce readmissions, all those classic things that everyone is interested in finding out. How can we do better?
And when you say coordinated care, is that making sure that once they leave the hospital, they're not sort of abandoned?
Right.
And how do we keep them out of the hospital in general?
And help them be healthier, right?
Yeah, it is really interesting. So much of healthcare is focused on what's going on inside the hospital, but if somebody gets there, of course, it's a failure of the system in general.
It's changing. It's really, I mean, as everyone knows, right, we're moving from a pay-for-service model to a, I don't know what the right term is, but improved health and preventative model. How do we improve care? And this capacitated model is coming, where you get a certain amount per patient for amount of time. How do you care for them in the right way, rather than just bring bodies in and do imaging or do whatever to raise money? That's not the goal anymore. It's how do we, and not that the goal was ever just focused on making money, but caring for patients, but there's a different focus now. You want to make sure, has somebody already done this test? Let's not do it again. And you see that throughout the organization. We have health information exchange with other organizations in the medical center. So now we can get more information about the patients who've been seen somewhere else and duplicate less effort and not spend the time redoing a test. Instead, you've already got the answer. Let's go from here.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
You hear about that issue so much where, okay, well, we went to a different hospital system, and so the doc can't see your past info. It's kind of crazy outside of healthcare. People don't really understand that that's how it works, but mind-boggling.
And kind of on that note, we had a great question from the chat about, de-identified data and privacy. Now, I imagine since you're pulling most of your work from the EHR, there's going to be names and dates attached to all of that. But do you do any work with de-identified data?
Sometimes I de-identify the data. So for example, this population health project is a great example. We've pulled some of their data into a separate database because not only is our population health project about patients, but it's about our employees. We're focused on employee risk. So we motivate all our employees or incentivize them to give us their blood once a year, and we look to see, are they hypertensive or have high cholesterol? And if they are, then we work with them to try and lower that. So not only are these patients, but they're coworkers. So we've pulled some of that data, and we have a vendor handling a lot of this for us. But to do some of the integration, we've got stuff in a separate database. And I've got a coworker I work with who needs to do some stuff with it. So I've actually set up views that hides. She knows names, but let's hide that social security number. We don't need that. We need it to communicate with the vendor to get everything done right, but let's not expose any more of that information than we need to.
Yeah.
So it's something we're very careful about and very sensitive to here.
Great.
Yeah, that's a
Thank
fantastic question across healthcare. So you mentioned clinical decision support is of interest. How do the clinicians feel about that from what you've seen? So the idea, right, is that, okay, well, instead of a clinician trying to keep everything in their head in terms of journal articles and Joe's past history, the idea is to serve up something to them. Okay, well, here's Joe's risk of readmission or high length of stay or infection.
So,
how do clinicians respond when you talk about those sort of things?
I'm going to turn around the other way. We don't normally drive. We drive some of the projects. Most of the projects are clinician driven or executive driven. So most of those projects, they're a clinician coming to us to say, I think we can predict readmission using some small number of features. Let's do it. So they are very happy to work with us. Or if I go talk to them after going rounds, they don't even realize we're here. So they're saying, okay, well, you can do, hey, how can you help me? What can we do? So maybe I'm only talking to the people who are really excited about this, but that's still a good place to start. And it gets other people motivated and they start seeing success stories.
That's amazing.
So we haven't hit barriers at all there.
Beautiful. It's best when they pull from their end because they're engaged and they appreciate the tool. They will use the tool. That's beautiful. And you mentioned readmissions being a top priority, which, as it is, a lot of health systems. Is that specific to a certain disease category most often, or do folks just want to know, okay, broadly, who's likely to be readmitted within, a certain time period?
So it's a little bit of both. I mean, one is, and I'm not an expert on policy, but I know there are certain areas where you get hit and you'll get penalties. I think COPD is one of those areas. There are a couple of specific cases or diagnoses where if those patients are readmitted, you get financial penalties or they're coming.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, everyone is looking at how do we reduce readmissions. Those 30-day readmissions are key. And again, making the person healthier so they don't need it. And what's involved in that? What are the different predictors? What are the subpopulations that tend to come back? How do we help them?
Beautiful. And you mentioned the clinician engagement being great. And so when you're finding these features to drive the model or to understand, what's causing these readmissions, how do you work with the clinician in the literature? What's kind of the, I guess, maybe the workflow, you could say, of how do you find out exactly what is driving readmissions for heart failure patients, for example?
So I think data science is a really, especially in this capacity, is a very iterative process. So that project I mentioned about the liver transplant patients, we had a big powwow last Friday, with the head of transplant, the head of liver transplant, and some other physicians to really sit down and say, okay, where are we going, what are we doing? And they had some really fantastic insight about, well, here's why we think this might work, here's why we think this might not work, maybe you want to consider this. It really, if you can get those people in the room, which I think we're really lucky to have had that opportunity, it really helps. That's when, right, I know enough clinical data to be a little dangerous. I know enough about statistics to know what I don't know and where I need to be really careful. So if you can get the right people to bounce those ideas off of, you end up with something better and you don't waste your time. That meeting really helped us focus, okay, let's look at this in more detail. So now we're off to do more of a lit review. We're off to figure out, okay, do we have all these measurements that we want to use? We've gotten some great insight there.
Yeah, the clinical input.
And now we're going to go back and we'll follow up and iterate. Okay, here's what we learned. When I started planning the project, we did the same thing. We would meet, really, and I'm a big fan of 10 or 15-minute meetings with clinicians, right? They're busy. They've got a lot of things to do. Let's meet for 10 minutes. Let's talk about where we are. I've digested the next piece. Okay, now I'm going to go off and work for a week or two. Let's meet again. Here's what I've learned. Now I'm ready for the next level. Both I'm ready for the next level and they're ready for the next level because they're learning what we can do with machine learning as well. So that type of rapid turnaround, short meeting, short focus, I've found to be very productive.
Yeah, and I love that. Nobody likes long meetings, or at least
No.
Most people I talk to don't love long meetings. So, be persistently polite, get 10 minutes on the calendar, be brief, be to the point, and it seems like people are really excited about machine learning in healthcare. What are the docs saying that you've been talking to, or the clinicians? Have they heard about these buzzwords, or where are they at?
They have. I mean, because we just went live with a new EHR, I think the biggest focus right now is how do we get to the new EHR data? And that's been a concern for everyone. It's been a concern for our team. It's been a concern for the EHR team. So that's really been the focus is people have kind of been hung up for a year, like, okay, we're using all the old data. Where's the new stuff? And so that's a concern. I think everyone's a little stuck on that right now, and we're in the process of fixing that. And once we fix that, we'll be back to, okay, what are some more interesting questions we can ask, and how do we partner more?
Yeah, that's I think a big problem in a lot of places. How do you actually access the data? So a couple of points, I guess, if we're talking to budding data scientists out there, folks looking to do this, is get clinicians engaged. Sounds like you've done a fantastic job of that, and then actually have a data warehouse or a functioning data warehouse that allows you to pull data from disparate sources. You mentioned some silos.
Actually, I was going to back up and say one of the things that I think this team has done really, really well, and it hinges back to that, or goes back to that de-identification question. We actually have a cohort discovery tool. We have a tool that people can search. The research community can go in and say, okay, well, how many male patients between the age of 17 and 34 are there who have diagnosed, congestive heart failure? Probably a bad example, but you can pick those ICD-9 codes, or you can look for certain procedure codes, and you can look for patient demographics. And this is all de-identified, but it gives them a sense of how big is the cohort. So if you're going to start writing a grant, or you want to start looking at a project, and you want to see, do we see any of these kind of patients or not? They can do that without even coming to us.
Oh, beautiful.
And that's a huge benefit. It gets them started, it gets them going. We now have a point where if they enter an IRB, we can then give them a de-identified subset of data. And again, they can start playing with that. And then if they really want more data that's identified, then we get involved and sit at the table. But we're starting to speed up that process and giving people more access to their data in a safe fashion, in a de-identified fashion.
That's fantastic.
That's a really neat tool, yeah.
As kind of a sneak preview of next week, where we're going to be talking about text analytics, how much of the data that you work with have you seen being coded versus free text, or is there a trend moving one way or the other?
Great question. So text versus structured data. I mainly deal with structured data. That's what my PhD work was. We do have some people on the team who have done some text analytics and some NLP of some of the data, but I haven't been as involved in that effort.
Okay.
But it's a huge opportunity. And we had that problem today. Okay, here's a report. We need to pull data off that report. So it's coming. It's harder to deal with, though. Be interested to see next week's talk.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Yeah, no, fantastic stuff here, Risa. Just a couple more questions if you have a minute. So
Sure.
You mentioned clinical decision support is important. Do you find kind of patterns in that you're staying mainly in the clinical realm? Are operations or maybe financial use cases of data science a little less common, or how's the balance there?
Oh, that's a great question. So I've had people mention to me that, oh, we need to start looking at supply chain. We need to start looking at financials. We haven't done as much of that. Mainly, we've been focused on clinical and operations and mainly the clinical side, but there are plenty of opportunities in the hospital and plenty of interest there to look into those kind of problems. They're huge. Yeah.
Matter of number of hours in the day to get it all done.
Right.
Yeah. It's exciting that everybody's that into data science and wanting your help. That's fantastic. So I did have a question about the data warehouse. So this is kind of a common term in healthcare. You know, how do you get the data silos broken down, get the data into one spot so you can work with it easily? Besides EMR data, are there other data sources that you're excited to work with?
Ooh, that's a great question.
You know, maybe census, or I don't know if you guys work with a certain payer and have claims data, but can you talk a little bit about the data warehouse a little bit?
So there is all of that, and we get it in bits and pieces. So often it becomes project dependent. What project are you working on? What other data sources do you need? So we have basically a pure database to our data warehouse where we can load data in. And we've also found that when we start working with a new data set, we'll sometimes pull that data directly. It motivates us to pull it into the data warehouse itself. But that stuff does exist, and we're kind of dealing with it really on a case-by-case basis. There's a lot of silos, as everyone knows, in hospitals. And we're just, how do you break that down? How do you encourage people to share that data? How do you safely share that data is something we deal with every day and struggle with every day, trying to figure out.
I think we're all struggling together with that. And that's why we're here, trying to break down silos across healthcare, machine learning, and data science. We really appreciate you coming on. Mike, anything in the chat? Everything looking good there? Any outstanding questions?
The conversation has followed the chat nicely,
Good.
And vice versa.
Great.
So
yeah, that's fantastic.
I'm happy on my side.
Yeah, and we
Great.
appreciate you joining the Slack channel, Risa. We may have to ping you for a question here or there in the future, you know, when we get stuck on a particular problem.
Oh, that's a great point.
That would be my pleasure. It's a great resource.
You know, if you had any outstanding questions, you can get Risa on the healthcare.ai Slack channel. She may or may not respond, but you can send her a message.
That's right. But fantastic chatting with you. Really appreciate you taking the moment, and we'll have to do it again soon.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Risa.
Yeah,
Bye.
we'll talk to you soon. Thank you for joining us today. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, comment below, and click the links below to join our Slack channel and our Healthcare AI community.